The rain battered the roof of the old Victorian house. Each drop a hammer against Clara Henshaw's fragile peace. She sat in her rocking chair, the one her late husband, George, had carved for their 10th anniversary, its creaks harmonizing with the storm outside. At 78, Clara's hands trembled as she clutched a yellowed letter, its edges frayed from years of rereading. The words, penned by her only son, Daniel, were as sharp as ever. "I'll take care of everything. Ma. Trust me." Trust. That word had been her undoing. Clara's life had been one of quiet sacrifice. Born in a small Maine town, she'd married George at 19, a man with calloused hands and a heart too big for his modest carpenter's wages. They'd raised Daniel in this very house, pouring love into him like water into a cracked bucket. Clara had worked nights at the local diner, her feet aching, to pay for Daniel's college. George had taken extra shifts at the lumberyard, his back bowing under the weight of their dreams for their boy. They'd believed in him, believed he'd carry their legacy forward with pride. But Daniel had other plans. By the time he was 30, Daniel had transformed from their earnest, freckled boy into a slick-talking financial advisor in Boston. His calls grew infrequent, his visits rarer. When George died 5 years ago, Daniel had shown up to the funeral in a tailored suit, his eyes dry and his promises glib. "I'll take care of you, Ma," he'd said, squeezing her hand. Clara had believed him, her grief blinding her to the stranger her son had become. The first sign of trouble came a year later. Clara had noticed withdrawals from her savings account, small at first, then larger, until the balance was a ghost of itself. When she confronted Daniel, he'd laughed it off, blaming bank errors, promising to sort it out. She'd trusted him, her only child, the boy she'd rocked to sleep through fevers and nightmares. But the withdrawals continued, and soon, letters arrived, demands from creditors, notices of loans she'd never taken. Her name, her signature, forged on documents tying her to debts she couldn't fathom. The house, her sanctuary, was now at risk, its title tangled in a web of liens. Clara's heart broke not from the money, but from the betrayal. Daniel had used her trust like a weapon, draining her life's work to fuel his own ambitiosa, flashy condo, a new car, a lifestyle built on lies. She'd called him, her voice shaking, begging for answers. "It's just business, Ma," he'd said, his tone cold. "You wouldn't understand." That was the moment Clara realized her son was gone, replaced by a man who saw her as a means to an end. She stopped sleeping. Nights were spent poring over bank statements, piecing together the scope of his deception. The numbers told a story of greed: $200, 000 in loans, credit cards maxed out, her retirement fund gutted. Clara, who'd once prided herself on her resilience, felt like a fool. But beneath the hurt, a fire kindled. She wasn't just a victim. She was Clara Henshaw, the woman who'd survived the Great Recession, who'd buried her husband and kept going. Daniel had underestimated her. Clara drove to the county courthouse the next morning, her hands steady on the wheel despite the storm. She met with a lawyer, a young woman named Sarah with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. Sarah listened as Clara recounted the betrayal, her voice cracking but never breaking. "We can fight this," Sarah said, spreading documents across her desk. "Fraud, forgery, elder abuse, will hit him with everything." Clara nodded, her jaw tight. She wasn't just fighting for her money. She was fighting for her dignity, for the life she and George had built. The first lawsuit was filed that week. Clara versus Daniel Henshaw, a claim for financial fraud and emotional distress. The papers were served to Daniel at his Boston office, and Clara imagined his face, those cold, calculating eyes widening in shock. She didn't want his apologies. She wanted justice. The courtroom became her battleground, each hearing a step toward reclaiming her power. Daniel's lawyers fought back, painting Clara as a confused old woman. But Sarah was relentless, unearthing emails and forged signatures that proved his guilt. As the case gained traction, whispers spread. Local papers picked up the story. Elderly woman sues son for millions in fraud. Clara hated the headlines, the pity in strangers' eyes. But she refused to hide. She attended every hearing, her back straight, her gaze unwavering. Daniel, meanwhile, unraveled. His clients dropped him. His reputation crumbled. The condo was sold, the car repossessed. Clara didn't revel in his ruin, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. He'd buried her in lies. Now she was burying him in consequences. By the 6th month, the court ruled in Clara's favor. Daniel was ordered to repay $250,000, including damages for emotional distress. But Clara knew money wouldn't heal the wound. The real victory was seeing Daniel's mask slip, his arrogance replaced by desperation. He called her late one night, his voice thick with tears. "Ma, I'm sorry," he said. Clara listened, her heart heavy but unmoved. "You made your choices, Daniel," she replied, and hung up. The house was safe now, the liens lifted. But Clara felt no triumph. She sat in her rocking chair, the storm outside long gone, and wondered where she'd gone wrong. Had she loved him too much? Not enough. The answers eluded her. But one truth remained. She'd fought for herself, for George's memory, for the life they'd built. And in that fight, she'd found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Clara's days took on a new rhythm after the first lawsuit. The victory had restored her financial footing, but the house felt emptier than ever. The walls, once filled with laughter and the clatter of George's tools, now echoed with silence. She'd walk past Daniel's old room, its door closed, and feel a pang not just for the boy he'd been, but for the mother she'd thought she was. The legal battle had saved her home, but it couldn't mend the rift between her and her son. Sarah, her lawyer, became a regular visitor. Over cups of chamomile tea, they planned the next steps. The first lawsuit had been about recovering Clara's losses, but Sarah had bigger ideas. "We can go after his assets," she said, her pen tapping the table. "He's still hiding money offshore accounts, investments under shell companies. We can freeze them, make him pay for what he's done." Clara hesitated. The thought of dragging Daniel deeper into ruin felt like twisting a knife in her own chest. But then she remembered his cold dismissal. "It's just business, Ma," and her resolve hardened. This wasn't revenge. It was accountability. Sarah's team dug into Daniel's finances, uncovering a trail of deceit that stretched beyond Clara's accounts. He'd defrauded other clients, elderly men and women like her, trusting souls who'd believed his promises of wealth. The scope of his betrayal stunned Clara. Her son wasn't just a liar. He was a predator. Sarah proposed a class action lawsuit, uniting Daniel's victims in a single, crushing blow. Clara agreed, not for the money, but for the others he'd hurt. She couldn't undo her own pain, but she could stop him from causing more. The class action suit was filed in federal court, a behemoth of a case that drew national attention. Reporters camped outside Clara's house, their cameras flashing as she stepped onto her porch. She faced them with quiet dignity, her white hair pulled back, her voice steady. "I'm not doing this for me," she told them. "I'm doing it for every parent who trusted their child, every person who believed in a lie." The headlines shifted, no longer pitying her, but celebrating her courage. Clara didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a mother mourning her son. Daniel's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence. Bank records, emails, Even recorded calls surfaced, painting a portrait of a man who'd built his empire on deceit. His clients, retirees, widows, small business owners testified one by one, their stories echoing Clara's. A woman in her 80s wept as she described losing her life savings. A veteran spoke of his trust betrayed. Clara sat in the courtroom, her hands folded, listening to the chorus of pain her son had caused. Each story was a brick in the wall closing around him. Outside the courtroom, Daniel's life continued to unravel. His fiancée left him. His friends vanished. Social media posts from former colleagues called him a fraud, a pariah. Clara saw it all. Not through her own search. She'd never been one for computers, but through clippings Sarah brought her. Part of her wanted to reach out, to ask why he'd chosen this path. But she stopped herself. He'd had his chance to explain, to make amends. He'd chosen silence instead. The class action suit dragged on, each hearing a battle of wills. Daniel's lawyers tried to shift blame, claiming he'd been misled by partners. But the evidence was ironclad. Clara testified last, her voice clear despite the tremor in her hands. She described the forged signatures, the drained accounts, the nights spent wondering how her son could do this. The jury listened, their faces solemn. When she finished, the courtroom was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. By the 9th month, the court ruled again. Daniel was ordered to pay millions in restitution. His assets seized to cover the damages. His name was synonymous with scandal now, his face plastered across news sites. Clara didn't watch the coverage. She didn't need to. She felt the victory in the letters from other victims' thank yous scrawled in shaky handwriting. Stories of reclaimed hope. They called her their champion. But Clara felt no pride. She'd only done what was right. Back in her house, Clara began to rebuild. She volunteered at the local senior center, teaching knitting to women her age. Their laughter a balm to her wounds. She tended her garden, coaxing roses from the earth as she'd once coaxed dreams from her son. The lawsuits had taken their toll. Her health was frailer, her heart heavier, but they'd also given her purpose. She wasn't just surviving. She was living. One evening, as she sat in her rocking chair, a letter arrived. No return address, just her name in Daniel's familiar scrawl. Her fingers hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a single page. "I'm sorry, Ma. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know." Clara read it twice, then set it aside. She didn't cry. She didn't write back. Instead, she looked out at the stars, wondering if George was watching, wondering if he'd be proud. The seasons changed, and Clara's life settled into a fragile normalcy. The lawsuits had drained her energy, but not her spirit. She woke each morning to the scent of coffee and the hum of her small town, finding solace in routine. The senior center became her refuge, where she taught not just knitting, but resilience, sharing her story with those who'd listen. The women there, with their own scars and stories, became her family, their voices filling the void Daniel had left. But the shadow of her son lingered. Clara couldn't escape the questions that haunted her. Had she missed the signs? Had her love been too blind? Her trust too absolute? She'd kept Daniel's letter on her nightstand, unread since that first night. A reminder of the son she'd lost, not to death, but to choices she couldn't comprehend. Sometimes, she'd trace the edges of the envelope, wondering if forgiveness was possible, wondering if it was deserved. Sarah called one crisp autumn morning with news. Daniel's filing for bankruptcy. She said, her voice clipped. He's trying to dodge the restitution payments. Clara's stomach tightened. She'd thought the worst was over, but Daniel's defiance felt like a fresh wound. Sarah proposed a new strategy: seize his remaining assets before they vanished into legal loopholes. "We can't let him slip away," Sarah said. Clara agreed, not out of spite, but because letting him escape would betray the others he'd hurt. The legal battle resumed, this time quieter but no less fierce. Sarah's team tracked Daniel's hidden accounts, uncovering properties and investments he'd buried under false names. Clara marveled at his cunning, a twisted reflection of the clever boy who'd once built model rockets in their backyard. Each discovery was a step toward justice, but also a reminder of how far he'd fallen. She didn't attend these hearings, her health wouldn't allow it, but Sarah kept her updated, her emails a lifeline to the fight. The town, too, had changed. Clara's story had made her a local legend, though she winced at the label. Neighbors brought her casseroles, their kindness laced with curiosity. At the diner where she'd once worked, old regulars bought her coffee, their eyes soft with admiration. You showed him, Clara, they'd say. She'd smile, but inside, she felt no triumph. Showing Daniel meant losing him, and no victory could erase that grief. One day, a stranger approached her at the senior Centera, woman in her 50s, her face lined with worry. You're Clara Henshaw, aren't you? She asked. Her name was Ellen, and her mother had been one of Daniel's victims. She died last year, Ellen said, her voice breaking. Your fight gave her peace in her final days. Clara held Ellen's hand, tears welling. She hadn't known her fight reached so far, touched so many. It was a reminder that her pain had purpose, that her stand mattered. The bankruptcy hearing came and went, with Daniel's attempts to evade justice thwarted. His last assets, a vacation home, a yacht, were sold, the proceeds divided among his victims. Clara's share was modest, but she donated it to the senior center, funding a program for financial literacy, so no one else falls for lies. She told the director. The program bore her name, though she insisted it didn't. She wanted no monuments, only change. Clara's health began to falter that winter. The stress of the lawsuits, the weight of betrayal, had taken its toll. Her doctor warned her to slow down, but Clara couldn't. She felt a fire inside, a need to keep going, to prove she was more than her son's victim. She started writing letters to other victims, sharing her story, offering hope. Their replies filled her mailbox, stories of loss, but also of strength. Clara kept them in a box under her bed, a testament to resilience. One snowy evening, as she sat by the fire, Clara opened Daniel's letter again. The words hadn't changed, but she had. She saw not just his apology, but the emptiness behind it. He hadn't asked about her, hadn't offered to make things right. It was a plea for absolution, not redemption. Clara folded the letter and placed it in the fire, watching the flames consume it. She didn't hate him. She pitted him, a man who'd traded love for greed, family for fleeting wealth. The stars outside were bright, and Clara felt George's presence, as she often did in quiet moments. She imagined him beside her, his hand on hers, his voice saying, "You did good, Clara." She smiled, her heart lighter. The lawsuits weren't just about money or justice. They were about reclaiming her voice, her strength, her life. Daniel had tried to bury her, but she'd risen, stronger than ever. Spring brought new life to Clara's garden, but her own strength was waning. The roses bloomed vibrant red, a stark contrast to the fatigue that now shadowed her days. At 79, her body protested the battles she'd fought, but her spirit remained unbowed. The legal victories had secured her home and restored her savings. Yet the cost was etched in the lines on her face, the ache in her bones. Still, Clara refused to retreat. She had one more fight left. Sarah arrived one morning with a thick folder and a grim expression. Daniel's appealing the class action ruling, she said. He's claiming procedural errors, trying to overturn the restitution. Clara's heart sank. She'd thought the worst was behind her. But Daniel's persistence was a reminder of his refusal to face his crimes. Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady. "We can counter this. Clara, we've got the evidence. The witnesses. He won't win." Clara nodded. But doubt gnawed at her. How much more could she endure? The appeal process was grueling. A maze of legal motions and countermotions. Clara couldn't attend the hearings. Her doctor had ordered rest, but she followed every update. Her kitchen table buried under legal documents. Sarah's team worked tirelessly, dismantling Daniel's claims with precision. They uncovered new evidence, a recorded conversation where Daniel boasted about outsmarting his clients, his voice dripping with arrogance. Clara listened to the tape, her hands trembling. That wasn't her son. That was a stranger. The appeal drew media attention again, this time with a national spotlight. A documentary crew contacted Clara, wanting to tell her story. She declined, unwilling to turn her pain into spectacle. But she agreed to an interview with a local journalist, a young man named Tom who'd grown up in her town. Over coffee, she spoke not of her anger, but of her hope that her fight would warn others, protect them from predators like Daniel. The article ran with a photo of Clara in her garden, her smile tired but resolute. Readers sent letters, calling her an inspiration. Clara kept them with the others, a growing collection of lives touched by her courage. Daniel's appeal failed, the court upholding the original ruling. His last hopes of salvaging his wealth were gone, his name now a cautionary tale in financial circles. Clara heard he'd moved to a small apartment, his once glamorous life reduced to scraps. She didn't gloat. She felt only a hollow sadness, a mourning for the boy who'd once run to her with scraped knees, trusting her to make it better. She couldn't fix this. No one could. Clara's health deteriorated further that summer. A heart condition, her doctor said, exacerbated by stress. She began spending more time at the senior center, not just teaching but listening, learning from the women who'd become her sisters. They shared stories of their own betrayals, children who'd forgotten them, promises broken. Clara realized her pain wasn't unique, but neither was her strength. Together, they formed a support group, a circle of survivors who lifted each other up. One afternoon, a young woman visited the center, her eyes red from crying. She was Daniel's ex-fiancée, Lily, now alone and grappling with the truth of the man she'd loved. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought he was good." Clara took her hand, seeing not an enemy, but another victim. They talked for hours, Lily pouring out her guilt, Clara offering quiet wisdom. "You didn't make his choices," Clara said. "You can make your own now." Lily left with a small smile, a seed of hope planted. Clara began writing a memoir, not for publication, but for herself. She titled it Roots and Ruin, a chronicle of her life with George, her love for Daniel, and the betrayal that had tested her soul. Each word was a step toward healing, a way to make sense of the chaos. She wrote of the lawsuits, the courtroom battles, but also of the roses in her garden, the laughter at the senior center, the letters from strangers who'd found strength in her story. The memoir became her legacy, a testament to resilience. As autumn approached, Clara received a call from Sarah. "Daniel's been indicted," she said. "Federal charges, wire fraud, money laundering. He could face prison." Clara sat in silence, the weight of it settling over her. She'd wanted justice, not destruction. But Daniel's choices had led him here, not hers. She thanked Sarah and hung up, her heart heavy but clear. She'd fought for what was right, and that was enough. That night, Clara sat in her rocking chair, the memoir open on her lap. She looked at the stars, as she always did when she needed George. "I did my best," she whispered. The wind carried her words, and she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Daniel's fate was his own now. Hers was to live, to love, to keep fighting for the life she deserved. Winter came early, blanketing Clara's town in snow. Her health had worsened, confining her to the house more days than not. The rocking chair became her sanctuary, its creaks a steady companion as she wrote the final chapters of her memoir. Each word was a labor, her hands stiff with arthritis. But she pressed on. She wasn't just writing for herself anymore. She was writing for the women at the senior center, for Ellen's mother, for every soul Daniel had wounded. Her story was their story, too. The federal indictment against Daniel dominated the news. Clara avoided the television, but snippets reached her: his arrest, his gaunt face in handcuffs, the headlines screaming, "Financial predator caught." She felt no satisfaction, only a quiet ache. She'd wanted him to change, to find the boy she'd raised. But that boy was gone. The man in his place had chosen a path she couldn't follow. Sarah visited weekly, bringing updates and homemade soup. The federal case was airtight, she said, built on the evidence from Clara's lawsuits. "You started this," Sarah told her, her eyes warm with pride. "Your courage brought him down." Clara shook her head. "I just wanted my life back," she said. But Sarah was right. Clara's fight had rippled outward, exposing Daniel's crimes to the world. She'd become a beacon, though she'd never sought the light. The senior center group grew, their meetings a blend of laughter and tears. Clara shared drafts of her memoir, reading aloud in a voice that trembled but never broke. The women listened, their own stories weaving into hers. One, a widow named Margaret, spoke of her estranged daughter. Another, Ruth, told of a brother who'd stolen her inheritance. They called themselves the Survivor's Circle, a name Clara hadn't chosen but embraced. Together, they healed, their shared strength a shield against the past. Clara's memoir neared completion, its pages a tapestry of pain and triumph. She wrote of George's love, of Daniel's betrayal, of the lawsuits that had reclaimed her power. But she also wrote of the small moments: the roses blooming, the letters from strangers, the warmth of the survivor's circle. These were the threads that held her together, the proof that life could endure even the deepest wounds. One February morning, a letter arrived from the federal prosecutor. Daniel had pleaded guilty, sparing Clara and the other victims a trial. He faced 7 years in prison, his assets liquidated to pay restitution. The prosecutor thanked Clara, calling her testimony pivotal. She set the letter down, her heart a tangle of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but it couldn't restore what was lost. She thought of Daniel in a cell, alone, and wondered if he'd ever understand the pain he'd caused. Clara's health took a sharp turn that spring. A heart attack, mild but warning, landed her in the hospital for a week. Sarah and the survivors' circle rallied around her, filling her room with flowers and stories. Lily, Daniel's ex-fiancée, visited, bringing a quilt she'd made. "You helped me start over," Lily said, her eyes clear now. Clara squeezed her hand, seeing in her the daughter she'd never had. "You're stronger than you know," Clara told her. Back home, Clara finished her memoir. The final chapter was short, a reflection on forgiveness not for Daniel, but for herself. She'd blamed herself for his choices, for not seeing the signs. But she realized now that love wasn't a contract. She'd given him everything, and he'd chosen to squander it. That was his burden, not hers. She titled the chapter, "Roots Reclaimed," a nod to the garden she'd tended through it all. The survivors' circle threw a small party when Clara announced the memoir's completion. They gathered in her living room, their laughter warming the house. Margaret read a passage aloud, her voice steady. "I fought not for revenge, but for the right to live free of lies. The women cheered, their hands clasped around Clara's. She smiled, her heart full. She'd lost a son, but she'd gained a family. As summer approached, Clara's strength waned further. She spent more time in her garden, her hands in the soil, her eyes on the roses. She thought of George, of the life they'd built, of the love that had carried her through. She thought of Daniel, too, not with anger, but with a distant hope that he might find redemption. Her fight was over, but her story would live on in the memoir, in the survivor's circle, in the lives she'd touched. That night, Clara sat in her rocking chair, the memoir on her lap. The stars were bright, and she felt George's presence. As always. "I did it," she whispered. "I lived." The wind carried her words, and she closed her eyes, at peace. Clara's final summer was gentle, the days soft with warmth and the hum of cicadas. Her health was fragile, but her spirit burned bright. She spent hours in her garden, tending the roses with hands that trembled but never faltered. The survivors' circle visited often, their voices a chorus of love in her quiet house. The memoir, now bound and shared among them, was her legacy, a story of betrayal overcome by resilience. Clara felt no need for more battles. She'd fought enough. The federal case against Daniel concluded in July. He was sentenced to 7 years, his name a footnote in a larger story of justice. Clara didn't attend the sentencing. She was too weak, but Sarah recounted it over tea. "He looked small," Sarah said, her voice soft. "He asked about you." Clara nodded, unsurprised. She'd stopped expecting Daniel to change. But the news stirred a faint hope, quickly tempered by reality. His remorse, if real, was too late. Clara's mailbox overflowed with letters from strangers. Her story, amplified by the documentary and Tom's article, had reached across the country. A teacher in Ohio wrote of using her memoir in class, teaching students about trust and betrayal. A retiree in Texas shared how Clara's courage inspired her to confront her own family's lies. Each letter was a thread in the tapestry of her impact, a reminder that her pain had purpose. She answered as many as she could, her handwriting shaky but determined. The survivors' circle grew, its meetings now held at the senior center to accommodate new members. Clara attended when she could, her wheelchair a new companion. The women shared their triumphs, Margaret reconciling with her daughter, Ruth starting a small business. Clara listened, her heart swelling. She'd sparked something bigger than herself, a movement of resilience that would outlive her. They named the financial literacy program after her, despite her protests. And she smiled when they unveiled the plaque, Clara Henshaw Center for Empowerment. Lily became a regular visitor, her presence a quiet comfort. She'd started a nonprofit to help victims of financial fraud, inspired by Clara's fight. "You showed me what strength looks like," Lily said one afternoon, helping Clara prune the roses. Clara chuckled, her breath short. "I just kept going," she said. "That's all strength is." Lily hugged her, and Clara felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. She'd lost a son, but she'd found a daughter in spirit. Clara's memoir found its way to a small publisher, a friend of Tom's who believed in its power. It was printed in modest runs, sold at the senior center and local bookstores. Clara didn't care about sales. She cared about reach. She signed copies for the survivors' circle, her hand trembling, but her smile steady. "For my sisters," she wrote in each, her heart in every word. The book wasn't about fame. It was about leaving a mark, a guide for others to find their way. One August evening, Clara sat in her rocking chair, the memoir opened to its final page. She'd added a dedication to George, who loved me first, and to the survivors' circle, who loved me last. The stars were bright, And she felt him again, his presence as real as the chair beneath her. She thought of Daniel, in his cell, and sent him a silent wish, not forgiveness, but peace. She'd carried his weight long enough. Clara's health failed in late August. The survivors' circle gathered at her bedside, their hands linked, their voices soft with stories and laughter. Sarah read from the memoir, her voice breaking on the final lines. I am not what was done to me. I am what I chose to become. Clara smiled, her eyes closing. She saw George's face, young and laughing, and felt a lightness she hadn't known since his death. She passed that night, surrounded by love, her garden blooming outside. The town mourned her, but the survivors' circle celebrated her. They scattered her ashes among the roses, as she'd asked, and vowed to carry her story forward. The memoir sold out its first run, then its second, its words inspiring readers far beyond Maine. Lily's nonprofit grew, saving lives with Clara's legacy. Daniel, in prison, received a copy of the memoir, sent anonymously. He read it in silence, tears falling on the pages. Clara's house stood quiet, but her roses bloomed each spring, a testament to her strength. The survivors' circle met weekly, their laughter echoing her spirit. She'd been buried in lies, but she'd risen in truth, leaving a world brighter for her fight. And under the stars, where she'd always found George, Clara's story lived on, a beacon for the broken, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal.